Chief Lee, how are you doing today?
Hey, good afternoon, John. How are you? You doing good?
Great, thanks. And thanks so much for taking the time. I really appreciate it. So, want to dive right into this. You've now been in role over a year as the Chief Criminal Division of IRS, and obviously also 25 plus years at IRS. Most of us in the AML community are obviously very familiar with the agency and the great work that you folks do. But for those that may not or might be new to the BSA AML space, what, from your perspective, what do folks need to know about IRS CI?
Yeah, appreciate it, John, and appreciate you giving me the opportunity to speak a little bit today. Give you the quick version about IRS CI. I mean, our mission in general is to serve the American public by investigating criminal tax violations. That's my priority, but we also investigate a lot of other related financial crimes, namely money laundering, bank secrecy, national security issues. Spend a lot of time in those areas as well. But my highest priority is to enforce the country's tax laws. I like to tell people that we play a significant deterrent role within the service. And what that deterrent role is people need to know there's a consequence for being willfully non-compliant. And that consequence is jail time, which is far different than paying a fine to resolve an issue. And I think a couple other notes. It's important to note we're the only agency authorized to investigate federal tax violations, but equally important, we're the only federal agency that dedicates 100% of their time to financial investigations. So therefore, we really protect the overall integrity of the financial system, which makes us incredibly unique. Maybe the last couple points for your audience. 75% of my time is spent on tax or tax-related crimes, 12% on narcotics, another 12% in pure money laundering. Our conviction rate remains amongst the highest in federal law enforcement. On average, about 90% of the time we get a conviction, simply suggesting that if you get in the crosshairs of an IRS CI special agent, it's highly likely you're going to jail.
Yeah, the conviction rate is really compelling, obviously, the percentages. The other thing that I'm interested in, besides a lot of these different crimes that you folks do investigate, is the sources for information. The reason I mentioned that is because there's been debate, as you well know, in Washington for the past couple of years, maybe longer, about the value of Bank Secrecy Act data. Now, I know there's other data clearly that you folks utilize, but I was definitely caught by the 2021 annual report that was just issued, where it lists the investigative sources that you folks use to investigate your crimes, obviously. And I see that 13% of that comes from FinCEN, internally about 20% where the civil or the criminal side of IRS, and 27% comes from U.S. attorney's offices and 31% federal agencies. So just high level, the value proposition of both data and information. Obviously, I think your predecessors, and you certainly have said this as well, that BSA data is so essential. But to the private sector that files this information, give us a sense of the import of clear and accurate information filing.
Yeah, that's a great question. And when I hear you ask the question, I think of partnerships and relationships, public-private partnerships and relationships. The work is critical. The way I'd respond to that, John, is, we're involved in, 92 or so SAR review teams nationwide. They meet regularly, typically monthly, to review SARs in their area. And, often these SAR review teams, they host meetings with local AML compliance professionals in order to foster those relationships. I highly encourage it. It puts everybody in the same room and they can discuss regional issues and emerging trends. And it's interesting you bring that up about the 13%. In the past this is why that data is so important. In the past 3 fiscal years, each year, approximately 13% of all of our investigations initiated are generated strictly from BSA data. Now that's tax and money laundering, cases alike. 13% comes from BSA data. And that's a huge, I mean, it's a major data set of investigations we pursue. But more importantly, in every investigation, I can't think of an investigation that we would work that we wouldn't look at BSA data. The 13% is just cases directly generated from there. And to give you just some slight context, the IRS is about 80,000 employees. Only about 7% of our inventory, our investigations initiated each year, come from the rest of the enterprise.
Wow.
So that's a clear indication how important, BSA data is, to our agents, to our inventory. It's a wealth of information.
In the 2021 report, it talks about how much tax fraud was identified, and it's close to $2.2 billion, and other financial crime over $8 billion. So obviously, when you folks can recover funds, that becomes obviously relevant in these days of trying to figure out, funding for the government and funding for programs and that sort of thing. So there must be some major satisfaction, not only in doing a prosecution, but when you can either recover or seize funds, after a case, that funding, that those dollars go to a whole host of things that are important to making the government and the economy move.
Yeah, no, that's a great point too. And obviously we use our money laundering statutes and our money laundering expertise, to not only seize ill-gotten gains, which goes over into our tee-off account, but we also work a lot of investigations where we seize money, and then that money gets returned to the actual victims, of a lot of these crimes. So a huge part of our strategy, especially on the money laundering side of the house, and our Title 18 statutes that we work revolve around seizures. I mean, because
Right.
to be quite frank with you, a lot of these criminal enterprises, I mean, you take away their money, that really kind of cuts the head off the snake, so to say.
No, that makes so much sense. And I should just tell the folks that are listening to take a look at the report, because there's some excellent case studies from the various field offices, whether they be on significant forfeitures or cases. And I think that helps sort of bring to light the value proposition of what you and your staff are doing. We're still in the pandemic, unfortunately. We hope we see the light at the end of the proverbial tunnel, but of course, there's more challenges. But obviously, the economy was struggling. Congress decided to fund and help those that were, out of work. So the PPP program was created. I know from talking to some of my banker friends that when this happened, it was parts of the Treasury Department rightly said, "Hey, we got to get this money out quickly. Let's be real efficient." Some of the bankers, at least the folks that I deal with that are in compliance, that are in financial crime prevention, said, time out, guys. We'll do this. We agree with you, the goal, but we have a feeling there's going to be a lot of fraud. And unfortunately, they were right. I'm sure your folks saw the same thing. I know that's something you still deal with and your staffs deal with. Give us a sense, not of the scope, because I know that changes, but the challenges of dealing with COVID fraud. Now, unfortunately, I've talked to other law enforcement folks. Whenever there's a problem, hurricanes, you name it, earthquakes, unfortunately, criminals come out of the woodwork. So this is not endemic necessarily to the pandemic, if I can be silly with wordplay there. But obviously, it was something that the bankers understood was going to happen, did happen. I know they're working with your colleagues, they're working with your staff to figure it all out. Give us a sense of the scope of COVID fraud that you guys have been dealing with for the past couple of years.
Yeah, great question. I get that a lot. It's a hard topic to avoid given the past 20 months, right? These are some of the most sickening crimes, amongst some of the most sickening crimes I see, because a lot of the work and time spent to process a lot of these loans could be time spent helping people that really need the support and the assistance. So, yeah, 20 months. Our investigators, our special agents, have really continued to investigate since the beginning. They haven't stopped, but they are investigating with compassion. Due to the fact that there are emotional hardships out there that can't be
Sure.
overlooked.
Right.
Our special agent position is a field job, by nature. They got to be out to work investigations. They got to be out there conducting interviews, interacting with people, gathering evidence, and they should be. Lots expected of our law enforcement officers because the folks committing the crimes are in full force. So my division, IRS CI, has been involved in all forms of COVID-related fraud since the beginning. Now, you mentioned the PPP loans. They have dominated the space for us. However, we have investigations going on in all COVID fraud-related areas. And, just to kind of summarize, give some context there, you got the Paycheck Protection
Right.
Program.
Mhm.
You got the Economic Injury Disaster Loans. We see a lot of fraud there. You got the Economic Impact Payments. A lot of fraud, and that's more of like an identity theft crime. You got the personal protected equipment. That's like counterfeit PPE. And then
Right.
you've got payroll tax credits. You got state unemployment benefits. And I would even throw in, the newer advanced child care credit as well into the COVID loans or COVID
Wow.
fraud. But the majority is PPP. The majority is all money laundering. But keep in mind that tax charges are present in some cases.
Mhm.
I mean, clearly your audience has heard that money laundering is tax evasion in progress.
Right.
My division and me, I'm very proud of our efforts in the COVID fraud area, where we've initiated just in fiscal year 21 alone, 384 federal COVID fraud cases. We've seen 206 indictments, and there's not a week that goes by where I'm not seeing an indictment related to COVID fraud. And I think another interesting fact is, through the end of the fiscal year, the average sentence imposed on the third, we have about 36 COVID fraud cases that actually made it to sentencing. And the average sentence is 3 years, just simply demonstrating, the judges don't take it lightly. And that kind of gives you some context of the value that we bring to the table regarding COVID fraud. I know just in July of this year, a gentleman was sentenced in Texas to 135 months, 9 years and 3 months. The judges don't take it lightly.
Yeah.
I'm just continuing to stress work the most significant COVID cases, and more importantly, the timely prosecution of these cases is critical so we can have a huge deterrent impact right now.
That's great, and IRS does a great job, not just at CI, but you folks do a great job of messaging things. Help consumers during tax reporting time, or be careful during the holidays. But when you complete some of these cases and people are sentenced, that information goes out. So I would also recommend to those that are listening to sign up for the various IRS, I'll call them newsletters because I'm an old guy, but the messaging that goes out from IRS, because I think that really brings home both the scope of what you folks cover, but also that it's very successful. So I think that's important, and it's there. It's being communicated. So there's no way that somebody in our space can say, well, I wasn't aware that IRS does X, because that information is handy and it's there. So another part of this that makes it that I always want to stress is that some people don't realize that IRS has an international component. Obviously offshore tax evasion is a major issue, but in addition to that, and feel free to talk about that as well, but the international scope of what some of your agents do, I think that's important, because I think in some cases it used to be like this with the FBI. People didn't realize the FBI had agents overseas, but some of your agents do work overseas. Give us a sense of how that works.
Yeah, it's another great question. Yeah, we refer to our agents overseas as attachés. I think the Bureau
Right.
refers to them as legats. Same difference. We have about 22 people at any given time permanently stationed overseas in 11 different posts. They really are liaisons, and each one of those posts cover a region, of the world,
Right.
and they just help, with our foreign national counterparts. They help us with the exchange of information, and one thing I think of, so we do a lot in the international arena, but there's one thing that your audience is probably familiar with. We just hit our 3-year anniversary with the J5, the Joint Chiefs of Global Tax Enforcement.
Right.
And for those that might not know, that's where, my counterparts, the criminal tax authorities overseas, and we call it the J5 because it's my counterparts in Australia, Canada, the Netherlands, and the UK, like-minded tax authorities
Right.
get together, work collaboratively, and hence why the J5 was formed. And one of the things that and there's a public-private partnership piece to this too, and I mean I love this. So it's a unique approach, in our international efforts. We refer to it as the challenge, and think of it like this: we just completed our 3rd chapter of the challenge, and this 3rd challenge revolves around the fintech industry and cryptocurrency. And the value can't be overstated because what happens is we essentially lock people in a room, for 24 hours from each country, public-private partners, varying technical skill sets. We figuratively lock them in a room. We have them bring real data from a variety of open source and investigative sources available to each country, and we
Right.
tell them to produce results. And that's exactly what they do. So at the end of a challenge, each country walks away with new investigative leads. The work being done in this space, makes the world much smaller for criminals. And I'm extremely confident to say to you right now that there are operational leads that we have and are actively working right now that we would not have without that J5 partnership and the challenge. And that all stems from our international partnerships in general.
That's great. Um, Shifting a little bit to the non-tax crimes, one of the things that struck me in the report, among the many, is that when we look at financial crime, we don't always focus on corruption, although corruption's sort of the key to all the crimes, right? I mean, but the focus on public corruption that the IRS has, and that's obviously in part because it's a violation of or the misuse of taxpayer dollars, right? So corruption by public officials, that's what happens. So they're getting kickbacks or embezzling, extortion. Talk a little bit about that. Is that the type of crime that typically needs undercover work? I know you guys have undercover agents, or is it a combination of things? And obviously there's, if you violated the public trust, most statutes will, give you pretty heavy jail time for doing that, and obviously civil fines as well. But talk a little bit about corruption and by public officials or government officials, whether they be U.S. or foreign, because I know that's part of your environment as well.
Yeah, it's another great question. I go back to 75% of my time is tax or
Right.
tax related, type crimes. And a lot of this public corruption falls into that tax related type of crime
Mm-hmm.
because, if you think about it, most federal crimes, and I highlight most, not all, but most federal crimes, other than random acts of violence, occur to make money, right?
Right.
So as a result, we can work and get involved in any case from a financial aspect. We simply have to be selective due to the resources we have. So when it comes to, so I can talk about public corruption. I could talk about any any type of crime, whether it's a corruption charge or bribery charge. Greed takes over, and that's why they're involved in these crimes. And so we get involved. We are around the country on a lot of the public corruption squads over at the Bureau. Um, it's a significant part of my program priority areas because again, we need to have a balanced program to send a deterrent message. You can't always just go after the little guy. You got to show you there's got to be a balance.
Right.
Across all our program priority areas, so people can see, hey, if that person can go to jail for that, so can I. And you hit the nail on the head. All these crimes of greed. You know, what, nobody's reporting that income on a tax return, and
Right.
that's why there's a huge value in tax charges there because all that's income um, from a narcotics dealer. I mean, the money they're generating from selling dope, that's income to them, and so that's why we play a very unique role, with our federal law enforcement brothers and sisters, and we add significant value from a financial standpoint to all these investigations because money, again, it's not a random act of violence. Money really just ties all the cases together.
Yeah, it's interesting. The every time there's and you guys aren't tied to administrations per se, so it's not really relevant from that perspective. But every time there's a shift in any sort of leadership, the financial sector sort of looks and says, what's going to be the focus on white collar crime? And it seems to me that you guys are always focused on that. If it's corporate fraud, if tax evasion, it doesn't matter. So what you folks do, the investigations you have, the criminals that you go after, it doesn't seem to change. I don't mean it can't change in terms of focus because cyber maybe deserves a different look than it did before, but just in general. So I guess, how do you look at white collar crime? This is more of an esoteric question because, like I said, I've been in this space for a long time, and it seems to me that the perception is always that white collar criminals get slapped on the wrist. That's not accurate. Obviously, some go to jail. There's very dramatic examples of that, and you point out a lot of people are doing pretty heavy jail time based on the violations of the tax laws. But if somebody were to say to you, at a at a picnic or something, hey Jim, yeah, you guys are doing all this, but are you really going after the white collar criminals? I'm not going to answer for you, but it seems like that's something that's always, you don't think of it like that. You think of it wherever the criminal is, we're going to go after him or her, right?
No, John, that's exactly right, and it's interesting because going back to when I first kind of opened up, 100% of our time are spent on financial investigations, and that's where that 90% conviction rate comes in. I'll
Right.
say that our average, in fiscal year 21, the full year, our average sentence on financial investigations in general, that's just everything, is about 43 months.
Wow. Yeah.
Which is significant jail time.
Sure.
Now, granted, that's the average, but that's pretty consistent. You
Mm-hmm.
know, I would say at least for the past 5 fiscal years, it's in that 40, month range. So there are significant sentences for financial crimes. Now, grant again, you do have some, that don't, and every agent that you talk to will give you that one war story where they worked really hard and somebody probably definitely deserved jail time, and
Right.
the judge didn't give it. But on average, it's 40 plus months, so it's significant. And again, I approach it, and my division approaches it as I've got to create deterrence. We are the backbone. IRS CI is the backbone of the service of the IRS. We have to demonstrate to folks that there's a consequence for being willfully non-compliant. And again, it's jail time. And my guys and gals, professionals, they do an incredible job. Their work ethic is second to none, and they're passionate about the mission.
Right.
When you think about it, 96% of the country's revenue flows through the service, right? And to have a voluntary system, there's got to be a deterrent for those that don't comply with the voluntary system, right?
Right.
And that's what we do. We give that to the American public. That's the value that we give. That's our relevance within the service.
No, and that's obviously well appreciated by not just those of us in the financial sector. The last category of things I want to cover with you is cyber. We referenced it before. Obviously, Cybersecurity is on everybody's mind. There's all sorts of ways in which funds get access that weren't a challenge 20 years ago. In your report, it talks about a whole host of things, but a couple of things jumped out at me. One is that you are planning to launch what you're calling an advanced collaboration and data center in the Northern Virginia area in 2022, which would bring together people from across the government to work on tax and financial systems, what I think is great. So I think obviously you continue to grow the cyber response, but I also noticed that when we talk about cryptocurrency, that same report reflects 3.5 billion in cryptocurrency was seized. And I know crypto is, we're all still trying to figure out and navigate what it is and what it's not. But obviously that's a space that IRS CI has been engaged in for a couple of years. Give us your take on crypto in general. Obviously, there's mixed messages, and I don't mean this in a pejorative way, from the government. You have Treasury Secretary Yellen saying she's concerned, but others saying similar things, but we really need to figure it out. But it's getting more and more play. And obviously, unfortunately, it can be used, and it has been used, and you guys have shown that in your cases to move illicit funds for a whole host of things. There's a part of your report talks about a Ukrainian cyber criminal who was decrypting all sorts of information on the dark web and passing that on to help facilitate ransomware and getting paid in crypto. So I know we could probably do 2 hours on crypto, but give us your sense
Easily.
of where that's going and sort of what the general focus is from your staff.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I know that easily is a 2-hour conversation. I've seen a significant growth and focus on cyber crimes, and I call it cyber crimes. Crypto is just one aspect of a cyber crime, right? But as evidenced in the report, that seized value of 3.5 billion in crypto that accounted for about 93% of all our seizures. I mean, that should suggest to folks that it's not as anonymous as people think. I do expect that trend to continue as we move, here into fiscal year 22. And I say that because it's something that you just mentioned. We do have plans to launch this collaboration center, and in spring of 2022. And in general, it's like a centralized hub for cyber training and tools and collaborative efforts, associated with cyber challenges in general, crypto being one of them. And it's more than just a physical structure, John. I would say it's more like a task force model approach. That's where we're bringing subject matter experts, cyber agents, contractors, treasury analysts, other IRS business units, public-private partnership. We're going to put them, at the center, equip them with the expensive tools that it takes to tackle the most notable cyber challenges. And this isn't new.
Right.
For the past 4 or 5 years, we've been modeling this on a much smaller scale out of our DC operations field office. We've seen great successes. I'm sure, in the crypto area with, a lot of notable cases that welcome the video case, the largest dark web marketplace for child exploitation. We took down Bitcoin Hamas, revolved around cryptocurrency fundraising for several terrorist organizations. We did a Silk Road seizure of $1 billion with a B, using this model and more. And the vision is the center, can be replicated to help all special agents around the country in any type of investigation, where they have a cyber related challenge, which leads right to the crypto challenges that you mentioned.
Yeah, it's going to continue to be that challenge. And to your point, it's the notion that it's completely anonymous. So many people, they just read headlines. They don't try to do what one of your guiding principles of your agency, master your craft. Continuous learning, as you talk about it.
I like that.
Yeah, I think that's such an important principle, and people should when you take a look at the report, you'll see the message from Jim, message from the chief that reiterates the guiding principles of IRS CI. Let me get you out of here on this. And again, so appreciate the time today. I know you got a lot on your plate. Things don't work perfectly in terms of calendar years, but we'll do what everybody else does. We're finishing up on 2021. we obviously all hope that 2022 will improve the both in the economics, but also the medical environments that we've been under. But what do you see as continued or maybe new challenges for financial crime prevention folks, whether they be your agents or partners from the private sector? What do you think the biggest challenges might be in 2022?
I think challenges. I mean, there's a lot of them, sir, John. Again, that's another 2-hour conversation. But
Sure.
this virtual currency, cryptocurrency, it's a continuing trending threat or challenge affecting AML efforts that I see. Tracking virtual currency is going to be the name of the game in both the money laundering world and the tax world. I think kind of moving into 2022, what's important to me, I've always valued, and when I say I mean my division has always valued public-private partnerships. We're going to continue to put significant emphasis there because it's proven these critical relationships, are a pathway to success. I would say, we touched on international a little bit.
Right.
I would just suggest that everybody be on the lookout for some operational announcements regarding our J5 partnership and other international efforts as well. But definitely the J5 partnership. I'm briefed regularly on those operations, and I expect a number of outward facing announcements, in the next quarter or two. And something I forgot to mention about the J5. That J5 doesn't operate in a vacuum. I mentioned the 5 countries that we talked to, but in addition to sharing information amongst each other, especially around professional enablers and crypto, we share information where appropriate with other countries as well. So we don't operate in a vacuum, and we don't just work tax. It's all types of financial crime. So syndicated conservation easements is abusive tax scheme, maybe for another day, sir. Crypto cases will continue to be looked at in the tax and money laundering area. I think, John, in my very humble opinion, if I may, the government can make no better investment than to invest in IRS CI because, again, not only do we provide deterrence and compliance within the tax system, but because we spend 100% of that time on financial crimes, we really create that deterrence and protect the integrity of the financial system. So you mentioned, I think maybe in closing, if you give me humor me for one more second.
Sure, go ahead.
Mentioned the communications and the publicity. We're going to continue to do that. Last spring, we took a step into the social media world, the first time with Twitter. So look, plug for Twitter, follow us, at the @ symbol, IRS_CI. And to your audience, listen, please know, you're not any more likely to be audited if you simply follow us on Twitter. So check it out.
Jim, that's great. I say here to that. I've been following you guys on Twitter for a long time. I'll end with this right from your report, right from your column in the report. You say this: today's criminals think we cannot catch them, but as evidenced by some of the great casework in this report, it is clear we can. So I agree with you wholeheartedly. Thanks so much for what you do for the financial community, but also for society in general. Thanks for taking the time with me. Have a great holiday, and we'll talk again.
Likewise, John. Thanks, and stay safe.